Found out my name wasn't even mentioned in my guardian's will. Everything went to my cousin. So I quietly stopped paying their rent and weekly grocery runs. A few weeks later, Aunt texted, "The water just got shut off." No hello, no explanation. I just replied, "Not my apartment." I, 32M, never thought I'd be writing this story, but here we are. Sometimes life hits you with a reality check so brutal that you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and love. My parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Uncle and aunt took me in without hesitation, raising me alongside their own son, my cousin. For 20 years, I believed I was part of their family. Not just taken in out of obligation, but truly wanted. I called them mom and dad. I celebrated holidays with them. I helped pay their bills when they got older and couldn't work anymore. The arrangement had been going on for 3 years. Every month, I'd send them $800 for their rent. Every week, I'd drive 40 minutes to their apartment with groceries worth about $150. It wasn't a burden. These were the people who raised me, who held me when I cried for my real parents, who came to my high school graduation, who celebrated when I got my first job. Uncle passed away suddenly from a heart attack last month. The funeral was devastating. I gave the eulogy, talking about how he'd been more than an uncle to me, how he'd stepped up when I needed a father figure, how grateful I was for everything he'd given me. Aunt cried during my speech, and I thought it was because she was proud of the man her husband had helped raise. The lawyer called a week later about the will reading. I showed up expecting formalities, maybe a small inheritance, but mostly just closure. Aunt was there with my cousin, both of them looking uncomfortable when I walked in. The lawyer began reading. Uncle's old truck went to a neighbor who'd helped him with yard work. Some savings bonds went to their church. The house they'd paid off years ago went to my cousin. Their retirement savings went to my cousin. Their life insurance policy went to my cousin. I kept waiting for my name. A family photo, a piece of jewelry, something to show I'd mattered. But the lawyer kept reading, and my name never came up. Not once. 20 years of being part of this family, and legally, I was nobody to them. The lawyer finished and asked if anyone had questions. I couldn't speak. My cousin wouldn't look at me. Aunt finally met my eyes and said they'd always planned to leave everything to their blood son. She said I was successful enough that I didn't need anything from them. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about all those grocery runs, all those rent payments, all those times I called them when I had good news or needed advice. They'd let me believe I was family while planning to cut me out of their legacy completely. I didn't make any dramatic announcements. I didn't have a confrontation. I just quietly stopped. The first of the month came, and I didn't send the rent money. The following week, I didn't show up with groceries. My phone stayed silent. Aunt called after the second week, asking where I was and why I hadn't brought food. She sounded annoyed, like I was failing in some obligation. I told her I'd been busy with work. She reminded me that they needed those groceries, that Uncle's pension had stopped, and they were relying on me. I told her I understood things were difficult. I didn't mention the will. Another week passed. She called again, this time about the rent. She said the landlord was asking questions about when the payment would arrive. I told her she should probably talk to my cousin about helping out, since he was inheriting everything. The conversation got tense. She said the inheritance was mostly the house and some savings, nothing liquid right now. She said my cousin had his own family to support and couldn't take on their expenses immediately. She reminded me that I'd been helping them for years and they depended on me. I asked her if she remembered the will reading. She got quiet. I asked her if she remembered that my name wasn't mentioned once in 20 years of legal documents. She started explaining that they'd always planned to leave things to their son, that it was natural, that I was doing well for myself. I told her that was fine, but I wasn't obligated to support people who didn't consider me family enough to remember in their will. She hung up on me. 2 more weeks went by. The texts started getting desperate. First about groceries, then about the rent being late, then about late fees adding up. I responded politely but briefly, suggesting she contact her son for help. My cousin finally called. He said he understood I was upset about the will, but that I was being petty. He said Aunt was stressed about money and I was making things worse. He explained that inheriting the house didn't mean he had cash to help with their immediate expenses. I asked him why he thought I should continue paying their bills when they'd made it clear I wasn't really family. He said that was ridiculous, that I was family in every way that mattered. I asked him why that sentiment wasn't reflected in any legal documents his parents had ever signed. He didn't have an answer for that. I told him I wished them both well, but I wouldn't continue financially supporting people who'd excluded me from their legacy while taking my money for years. He called me selfish and hung up. The utilities started getting shut off 3 weeks later. The text message was exactly what I expected. The water just got shut off. No greeting, no explanation of the situation, no acknowledgement of what had happened between us. Just a demand disguised as a notification. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before responding. 3 words, not my apartment. She immediately called. She was crying, saying she didn't understand why I was doing this to them. She said Uncle would be disappointed in me. She said I was abandoning them when they needed me most. I reminded her that for 3 years, I'd been sending nearly $15,000 annually to support them. I'd done this believing I was helping family, people who saw me as more than just a convenient source of income. I told her that learning I meant so little to them that I wasn't worth mentioning in their will had been devastating. Not because I wanted their money, but because it revealed how they really saw me after 20 years. She tried to explain again that they'd left everything to their real son because it made sense. The moment she said real son, I knew this conversation was over. I told her that her real son could take care of her real problems, and I hung up. Update 1. It's been a month since I stopped supporting them. The messages have been getting increasingly frantic. Anne had to move in with my cousin because she couldn't afford the apartment anymore. She's been sleeping on their couch. My cousin's wife called me last week. She said having Anne in their house was putting stress on their marriage. She said their kids were asking questions about why Grandma seemed so sad all the time. She begged me to reconsider helping out, just temporarily. I felt bad for her. She'd been caught in the middle of something that wasn't her fault. But I explained that I'd spent 3 years supporting Anne under the belief that I was family, only to discover that I was essentially a convenient ATM. She said she understood my hurt, but that punishing Aunt wasn't going to change the will or make the pain go away. She said I was better than this kind of revenge. That word stuck with me. Revenge. Was that what this was? I thought about it for days. I'd been telling myself that I was simply stopping an arrangement that had been based on false pretenses. That I was protecting myself from being used by people who saw me as an outsider despite 20 years of shared history. But maybe it was revenge. Maybe I wanted them to understand what it felt like to lose something they'd taken for granted. My cousin texted me a few days later with photos. Aunt in their cramped living room, looking frail and tired. Her belongings stuffed into garbage bags in the corner. He said she'd aged 10 years in the past month. He wrote that he was sorry about how the will had been handled. He said they should have talked to me about it beforehand, should have explained their reasoning. He said they'd never meant to hurt me. But then he said something that made me realize nothing had really changed. He said that family doesn't abandon family over money and legal documents. I replied asking him why that principle hadn't applied when his parents were deciding who counted as family in their will. He read the message but never responded. Update 2. Things escalated last week in a way I didn't expect. Aunt showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen her since the will reading, and the change was shocking. She'd lost weight. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she looked exhausted. My cousin's wife had driven her over and was waiting in the car. I almost didn't let her in, but she started crying on my doorstep, and I couldn't leave her standing there. She sat on my couch, the same couch where she'd helped me with homework 20 years ago, and told me she was sorry. She said she'd never meant for me to find out about the will the way I did. She said they'd planned to talk to me about it eventually, to explain their decision. I asked her to explain it now. She said that when they took me in, they'd made a promise to my parents to raise me as their own, but they'd always known I wasn't their biological child. She said they'd loved me and tried to treat me fairly, but when it came to their legacy, they felt obligated to leave things to their biological son. I asked her if she understood how that made me feel. 20 years of being told I was their son, only to discover that in the most legal and lasting sense, I never was. She cried harder and said she knew it was wrong. She said they'd made a mistake, that they should have included me somehow. She said Uncle had regretted the decision in his final months, but hadn't known how to change things without causing family drama. That phrase made me laugh bitterly. They'd been worried about causing family drama by including me in the will, but hadn't considered the drama of excluding me. She begged me to forgive them, to help her get back on her feet. She said she'd been paying for their mistake every day since the utilities got shut off. I told her I'd forgiven them already. Holding on to anger was hurting me more than anyone else. But forgiveness didn't mean I had to continue supporting someone who'd made it clear where I stood in their priorities. She asked what it would take for me to help again. I told her the truth, nothing. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because the relationship had been fundamentally changed by what I'd learned. I couldn't go back to supporting them as family when they'd proven I wasn't really family to them. She left defeated. Through my window, I watched her get back into the car where my cousin's wife was waiting. They sat there talking for 10 minutes before driving away. Update 3. The situation came to a head this past weekend. My cousin called and asked me to meet him at a coffee shop near my old apartment. He said we needed to talk, that things had gone too far. When I arrived, he had papers with him. Legal documents. He'd had a lawyer draw up papers to transfer half of Uncle's house to me. He said he'd realized how wrong their decision had been. He said watching his mother deteriorate over the past 2 months had made him understand the real cost of excluding me from the will. He said he wanted to make things right. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. I asked him why he was doing this now. He was honest. He said having Aunt in their house was destroying his family. His wife was resentful, his kids were confused, and the financial strain of supporting her was significant. He said he'd tried to help her find affordable housing, but her credit was poor and her income was limited. He said giving me half the house would allow me to sell my portion and help Aunt get back on her feet, while giving him space to rebuild his own family's stability. I appreciated his honesty, but I told him the gesture was meaningless now. The house represented their parents' legacy, their final statement about who mattered to them. Redistributing it after the fact because the consequences became inconvenient didn't change what that legacy meant. He said I was being stubborn, that I was letting pride keep me from doing the right thing. He said Aunt had raised me and deserved better than this abandonment. I asked him if he thought I deserved better than being excluded from the will after 20 years of believing I was family. He didn't answer directly. He said that what was done, but we could still choose how to move forward. I left the papers on the table and walked out. Final update. It's been 6 months since the will reading. Aunt is still living with my cousin, and from what I hear through mutual acquaintances, it's not going well. His wife has talked about separation. Their kids are acting out at school. The financial and emotional strain is taking its toll on everyone. My cousin has made a few more attempts to reach out, but I've kept my responses brief and polite. I bear no ill will toward any of them, but I've accepted that our relationship has changed permanently. The hardest part has been the loneliness. For 20 years, these people were my closest family. Losing them has created a void that's been difficult to fill. But I've realized that the relationship was built on my misunderstanding of where I stood with them. I've started building new relationships, investing in friendships that are based on mutual respect and clear expectations. I've also started therapy to work through the complex grief of losing not just Uncle, but the entire family structure I thought I belonged to. Some people have told me I should have taken the house transfer and helped Aunt. They say I'm being petty or holding grudges. But this was never about money or property. It was about dignity and self-respect. For 3 years, I've been sending them $15,000 annually because I believed they saw me as family. Learning that I'd been excluded from their will while accepting my financial support felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. I don't regret stepping back. I learned something important about standing up for myself and not accepting relationships built on false pretenses. Sometimes the people who raised you can love you and still not see you as truly belonging to their family. Sometimes you have to choose between enabling that dynamic and protecting your own dignity. The text about the water being shut off was the perfect encapsulation of how they saw me. Not as family to be cherished, but as a resource to be tapped when needed. My response was equally encapsulating. I'm not responsible for problems in a life I was never truly part of. They made their choice about my place in their family long before I made mine about my place in their support system. I just finally learned to match my actions to their true feelings rather than their convenient words. Looking back, I think Uncle's regret in his final months wasn't about the will itself, but about getting caught. They'd planned to keep taking my money indefinitely while maintaining the legal fiction that I wasn't really family. The will reading forced them to confront the contradiction they'd been living with for years. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad anymore. I'm just clear about what is and isn't my responsibility. And paying the bills for people who spent 20 years making sure I knew I wasn't really their family isn't my responsibility. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once revealed for what they really were, can't be restored. And sometimes, that's exactly how it should be. The water got shut off, but it was never my apartment anyway. It just took me 3 years and a while reading to fully understand that.